we're going to be focusing on the land use and food issues around climate change and how do we combat it and address it. And this will be my wife Joy and myself, Mark Measures. We run a farm in the Clun Valley, and I've been working with the Organic Research Centre on matters of farm advice, policy and research for the last 35 years. The workshop, this will just give you an idea of how we're going to try and structure this workshop. We're going to deal with farming and land management first, and then the food system secondly. I'm going to try and pick out some of the sort of key points from the farming and land management from the report, and then there's a chance for you to contribute to that, deal with any questions, suggestions, and so on. But then we'll finish off with trying to identify how we take this forward, which perhaps is the most important part of our discussion today. So please be sort of active and contribute to some ideas there. And then secondly, Joy is going to lead on the food system side of it, again picking up on key points from the report, your discussion, questions, suggestions, and how do we take it forward. Yeah.
I just wanted to say just a few words. Hello, I'm the other half, although we don't usually want to be called that. We've been farming here together for 25 years, I think, but my background is in nature conservation and education. So as a farmer, I'm still learning. And I just wanted to say, in producing the report, we had a really keen group of volunteers. We certainly didn't all agree, but we did all agree we need to act. And I found some of the process quite difficult, partly because of the media and the press, there are so many generalizations around, and there are an awful lot of sweeping statements about things that farmers do or don't do, as if all farmers are the same, which of course they aren't. And there are an awful lot of quick fixes. You know, the government did it with let's plant millions of trees with no discussion about where, how or when. And so I'm coming from a place where I actually am deeply attached to this land that we try to manage sympathetically, and it's a constant balancing act. So I'm hoping that we can explore together, because land use and its management and food is a huge topic, and we've got a short amount of time, but the conference is about starting points, so we'll start here. So I'll hand you back to Mark.
So this is just to give us a sense of where agriculture fits into the overall picture. And as we know, sort of 9 or 10% of emissions in our society is to do with agriculture. But once you start to look at the wider picture, which includes the whole food system and land use change, processing, transport, forests, and so on, then it gets to 30% of emissions and becomes a major part of tackling climate change. From a farmer's and land manager's perspective, the three main categories that we're dealing with is around energy, greenhouse gas emissions, and the potential for carbon sequestration. And so the sorts of practices which are identified in the report, in one way or another, focus on these different areas of generating electricity, reducing energy use, emissions, and carbon sequestration. I think one of the frustrating things is about getting the engagement of the farming community in here, and we'll pick up on that later, but the reality is, of course, that I think probably have no farmers in this group, so we need to recognize that this is a real challenge for us. I think one of the key messages from the work that we did was that farming particularly cannot continue with a business as usual approach. It actually needs a fundamental change in the way that we produce food and a much better understanding of how that relates to the natural environment. And engaging with nature and developing genuinely agroecological and organic farming systems is absolutely fundamental, and is the basis of what Nick was talking about earlier, which is the integration of wildlife and environmental habitat and so on in the farmed land, as well as the land surrounding the fields. And this just highlights one or two key points which I think we should emphasize, and that includes crop and livestock diversity. So some really important areas around soil and soil health, particularly on organic matter, biological activity, soil structure. Then how do we generate the fertility for the crops that we're growing, particularly the nitrogen supply and the avoidance as far as possible of nitrogen fertilizers because of the embodied energy involved, the use of legumes, use of leys and green manures in crop rotations, the need to minimize pesticides and medicines because of all the downsides that they have, which are direct and indirect in terms of climate change, the use of manures, and the integration of wildlife, trees and shelter into the actual farming operation, the way that we farm, grow, manage our wider landscape. So I should just make a point that this sort of fundamental change is not pie in the sky. During our work in the last 30 or 40 years has brought about a fundamental change in European agricultural policy now, where they have a target of 30% organic farming. This sort of change can happen, and I think gives us hope for the future for what we're doing in South Shropshire. The tool that we've developed in the project is particularly aimed at helping farmers, land managers, growers, even gardeners, wildlife site managers. It provides a traffic light system for identifying what are good practices and bad practices. And I'll just pick up on one or two obvious points. We've got under the cropping and pastures, top left here, for example, the use of peat in plant propagation gets a red dot for both greenhouse gas and biodiversity impact, whereas the use of diverse leys benefits both emissions and biodiversity. So it's a tool to be used with farmers and land managers, which can help them develop better systems. And we have a similar traffic light system for use in woodland management. So I'm going to pick up on any questions that you've got now. So I'll stop there, and so we'll deal with any questions that you've got about what's in the report around land management, and some suggestions about how we can take it forward. I may have to get out of my box in order to look at the chats.
People can put questions in the chat if they want to ask Mark and Joy anything.
Or you
specific.
can just pile them. There are.
I think, to be honest, there's so few of us. I would, if people have got questions, just unmute and fire away. I mean, I guess. Sorry.
Sorry, Nick.
Well, it wasn't a question. I suppose it was more an observation. But one of the reasons that we had developed a traffic light system was because it's actually very difficult to be precise. And one of the issues I think we're going to face is how we can collectively assess whether sufficient change is taking place across a sufficient number of farms to make an impact. So you can do a whole farm plan for one farm and know that that's having an impact, but we've got to sort of galvanise the whole of South Shropshire in some ways, and the land management section, in order to know that we're having that impact. And it's both true for greenhouse gases and for enhancing the biodiversity and the nature recovery networks. So achieving critical mass is going to be very difficult, I think, in this sector.
Yes, and I should have added just at the beginning that obviously the farmed land is hugely significant in South Shropshire. I mean, nationally, I think it's 79%. In South Shropshire, it's probably more than that land that is farmed. But there's obviously also growers, there's all our gardeners, and there's things that get forgotten about, like race courses and golf courses. And so the way everyone is managing land is hugely important. And I think if we can get that message and we're all in this together, and somehow stop the constant criticism, because people don't change when they're criticized all the time.
I think I very much agree with that one. Sorry, I'm just taking it. Someone's calling me at the centre. Great timing. Yeah, sorry. I just think that you've made a very good point, and I think, as I said, I'm working on this. Hold on just a sec. There we go. I'm working on this project for Shropshire at the moment, where we're trying to look at integrating agroforestry into not just Shropshire, but 3 other counties around the UK. And the main thing that we're coming across is this idea of engagement and speaking to farmers. You know, as a stock farmer myself, I understand it is a challenge, and seemingly a lot of what this seeming to come down to is perception and language. You know, it's the way our farmers listen to when schemes are put out. And a lot of people that I know farm in probably an agroecological way or incorporate agroforestry techniques. I had an argument with somebody the other day in a pub. We were arguing about in a beer garden about agroforestry and whether it was a good idea, and he was vehemently saying it wasn't. And when I cycled past his house the other day, his whole farm is surrounded by a grazed orchard that I'm going to go and photograph. It's a textbook example for the work that I'm doing. So for me, I think my initial outlay is a big part of this is about engagement. It's perception. It's about using language that farmers feel belongs to them, you know, and I think that's part of the difficult thing. If I go, and I know farmers who I would consider to farm agroecologically, but if I use that language, they're instantly turned off. I don't know if you guys have got comments on, you know, on what sort of conversation needs to happen with farmers and what sort of language we need to use.
Well, I mean, I suppose just dealing with the introduction of organic farming, which has been the work I've focused on. I mean, one of the most powerful tools, of course, is to take farmers onto successful farms that are already applying the different techniques. And I think the seeing is believing is a really important part. And, you know, perhaps one thing we could do would be to provide some sort of a network where farmers could visit other sites where things are being done successfully. And yes, you're right. I mean, there is a real language problem, and that has been an obstacle in the past. You know, it's interesting now that there seems to be a more ready reception of the use of the word regenerative rather than agroecological, even though it may not be very well defined. And you know, perhaps we have to go with whatever language is being most easily used by farmers. And you know, I think your agroforestry example is a very good one, because, you know, lots of people are already doing it, and of course it fits with our ambitions really well.
I think Harry's hit the nail on the head, really. It's that engagement and how to do that. And Harry, have you got any brilliant insights or ideas on how one can go about this? I mean, is it things like farming clusters, or? Well,
there's a lot of different ways I'm looking at the moment, and I think there's a very good film, I don't know if anyone saw it. It was, I think it was called like Love Soil or something like that. It was a national conversation on this issue. I watched it the other day, and it's really what changed the way I was approaching the project. Features Kate from the North Shropshire Farming Group, if you know Kate Main. And also my brother's the poet on it, who finishes it off. And when I watched it, I didn't know either of them were in it, so it was a bit of a shock. But that approaches it very well in terms of a national conversation. And I think I think schemes in general, and when I wrote this, the first parts of the scheme, I wrote it in scheme language. Here it is, and the very much the narrative was, here is the project, here is what we're offering, like it or not, you know. And I think just farmers who aren't always approaching things from a scientific perspective, they're not looking from a research perspective, there needs to be a conversation on this. We need to address issues. The first point I'm going in with now with a language that is, we want you to keep farming the land, we want to cut the red tape, we want to hear what you think. You know, if you've got a concern about, you've got an axe, if you think this is great, apply, give me your information. If you think it's a load of rubbish and you've got an axe to grind, even better, I want to hear from you even more. You know, that's the point. And we hear what they have to say, because I think generally environmentalists and farmers tend to be on opposite perspectives. Environmentalists are often optimists, that they sometimes oversell benefits. We're like generally looking for, you know, we're trying to inspire change, whereas farmers can be pessimistic. And same with people in the tree industry where I'm from, because you have to be a good farmer, you have to spot things that might go wrong in the process. And I think sometimes it's that balance of optimism and pessimism that needs to be addressed. Personally, I think we need to listen to farmers, we need to hear what they say, we need to hear what their concerns are, and we need to react to those first at the first point of call, really.
And what is the project that you're doing, Harry? What's it?
Well, it'd be good. Yeah, it's so what we're doing is we're running a pilot scheme across 4 counties. So we're doing one in Shropshire, Norfolk, Cornwall, and Chichester District Council, and we'll be looking to fund projects that it's really covering outside woodland agroforestry, really. So I'll be looking for projects that trying to engage a good range of farmers, find out their opinions and backgrounds, and then fund through capital grant funding projects that might be able to teach us how we can innovate and how we can engage, and what sort of projects are out there for those 4, including agroforestry and orchards. But yeah, as I said, I think some of these will be quite unpopular. So the idea is not just finding out what people are interested in and why, finding out which things people aren't interested in, those reasons as well, so we can look to address those in the coming years. So it'd be great to link up with you guys on this, because I know there's going to be a lot of crossover in what you've done, and I'm starting to go through your report at the moment, and it's going to be invaluable to me. So,
well, I think it'd be good to get any feedback from you, actually, particularly on the traffic lights, and whether you think we've covered off everything that we need to. So you know, it's an evolving process. To do contribute.
Will do.
Yeah. So does anybody else have any questions before we move on to the sort of the food section of this workshop?
Well, I just wanted to ask how we can stay in, well, sort of track what Harry's doing, and how we can stay in touch as well, because certainly in my area, I've just become a parish councillor because of my concern around the way that some of the land around here is looked after. Clee St Margaret Parish is responsible for Clee Liberty Common, which is a big area, and it's very much overgrazed, and so there is going to have to be a dialogue with the local farmers. I understand that it's common land and it's enhancing their income, so how do we start that conversation around taking sheep off so that it's not so overgrazed, but without challenging them and their means of earning income, and maybe think about doing things differently, particularly around tree planting, not so much agroforestry, but in terms of slow the flow as much as anything, because we're up quite high and there's flooding that happens underneath us. So it's about how to approach that conversation so that me, who's been elected on as a bit of a green voice, can have that sort of that dialogue with the farmers who we could be antagonistic, and I don't want that. So how can we do that? So how can we track what you're doing, Harry, and how can we stay in touch if we perhaps could do with some advice?
Well, yeah, I'm just at early stages now, so I've got a bit of a proposal put together now, and I'm looking at probably starting to get more engaged in the communities and things over the next couple of weeks, probably as of next month, really. So yeah, by all means, get in touch with us, and I can keep you updated on how the project's going. The idea is to have a bit of a portal where we can gauge opinion and we can start to look at some of these issues as part of that consultation process, and I hope that feeds in both ways. So I was hoping that this group might be able to steer farmers in the direction of that, of coming and having a chat with me and going through that process. At the same time, you know, happy to meet and chat about issues like that.
Is there a way you can put contact details in the chat or something
Yeah,
along those
I'll
lines?
put my email address down in the chat now.
Fabulous. Thank you so much.
No worries.
I think it's also, sorry, Chris, go on.
Could I come back on the commoners? I couldn't see who was asking that question, but I know that there is a project currently, a pilot project on commoners with the National Trust going on in Shropshire at the moment around the Long Mynd. And somebody who's facilitating some of that work and negotiating between commoners and National Trust bodies might be able to help you with that.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. It was Scarlett who asked that question, and I think that's a stepping stone project that you're. So I'm going to start looking. Oh, it's a different one, is it?
It's not the Stepping Stones project. No, this is a direct piece of work that they've commissioned across 3 areas: one, the Lake District National Park, or AONB, down in Exmoor, and the Long Mynd. So National Trust and commoners.
The person you need to talk to is Kath Landels at the AONB, because it's a national commoners project, you're right, but she's specifically been working on the Clee, and she's got years of experience about liaising with farmers. She's a farmer's daughter herself, and as has already been said, so much of it is just the way people are approached.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge.
Sorry, everybody. I think we should move on, but it is worth pointing out that in the report itself, there is an appendix with a load of useful contacts for the existing land use and environmental groups that we're already aware of within the patch as well. So there should be a lot of material there for people to follow up. I think we're going to run out of time if we're not careful, and I'd like to do justice to stage 2, if that's okay.
Nick, what time have we actually got to finish?
Well, I don't know. I don't think it's because we were a bit late starting as well. I'm a bit worried that we'll just get cut off in our prime if we're not careful.
They said we wouldn't
Okay.
get cut off. Did anyone pick up what time they said we were going to be back? Because it should have been, it should have
12:20, I thought.
Okay.
12:20, Janet.
Well, I mean, if we've got time for questions at the end, let's carry on then. But I think to do justice to what you've done,
let's go on to the food. Just hang on a minute. We need to deal with the technology. Can you go back? That's it.
Okay, can you see that slide?
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Okay. You could spend a whole day, well, a whole week discussing this. Mark's already referred to the carbon footprint from the actual production of food, and that can be food from a large farm, a small holding, growers, or your own garden. But a huge amount of the emissions that are actually coming from our food are to do with packaging, transport, storage, and waste. And the waste of our food is absolutely huge before it even gets to the shops, and at the other end of the scale in households where a lot of food gets thrown away. And those of us who are actually producing food, I think, feel that this is somewhere where everybody can act and where we could actually all make a huge amount of difference. And we've highlighted that figure at the end. The Shropshire Action Plan talks about reducing waste, I think it's general waste, by only 10%. I think we have to be a lot more ambitious than that, because we can all do something about that last point. The other point is about our diet and our shopping habits, because we will all have very strong views about what we should and shouldn't be eating. And we need to be thinking about not only keeping the land healthy, but our food being healthy and being healthy ourselves. And that the fact that the land is important for our well-being and for all the biodiversity and landscape that's being discussed in other groups. So going back to what I said at the beginning, I think we just all need to try and understand the food chain, because it is complicated. And these sort of sweeping statements that often come from dietitians about what is best for us or not best for us, or whether we should be eating plants, vegetables, meat, etc. They often don't talk about how that food is actually produced and where it's come from. And I think that's probably very, very key. Some of you may have seen a very well-researched television program where they calculated carbon emissions from different foods, not just carbon, emissions generally. And on that particular program, avocados came out with the highest emissions, not because there's anything wrong with avocados, but because of where they come from. And then there were different figures for things like red meat, which has emissions, which we know about, but it depended hugely on the size of the portion, not just how often you ate it. And then there were differences between farmed fish, obviously, and fresh fish. So it is a complex issue, but I don't think that should mean we feel we can't do anything. And I was speaking to a neighbouring farmer yesterday who was actually talking about the amount of food that was produced in this country soon after the war, which I think was about 65, we were about 65% self-sufficient. It's a lot lower than that now. And it's not because we can't do it, it's because we choose to buy it elsewhere because it's cheap. I think I've said enough. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. And do you want to just show the last slide, Mark, or not?
No.
No, you want Mark's for the last slide, but we'll keep that. We'll have a few questions and then what can we all do? No. Oops.
Okay, so yeah, any questions or suggestions, or yeah, particularly your views, comments?
Could I make just a comment rather than a question? It's just working with those in food poverty. You know, it is a complex issue, and people who are out in very rural areas get little choice about where they can buy and what they can buy, and the things that they might want to buy aren't always available or not at a price they can afford. And at the end of the day, there is a lot of people who get very little choice about what they eat because of poverty and choice and accessibility. And the research they've just done in Southwest Shropshire, you know, looking at the different prices, you know, it's a basket of food, 20 items, cost £18 in Aldi and Ludlow. The same basket in Clun costs you £43 at the Spa. And there was everything in between. So if you're living on a very limited budget, it is really hard to even engage in all this.
Yes, that is true. And that's why projects like the one going on in Craven Arms, engaging with communities and about growing local food, and how people can actually save in the way if they've got time to cook, and whether there is actually food that's being wasted. I mean, I agree there's a huge difference in the prices about where you shop, but we do actually know that people can shop in places that appear to be cheap, but they'll end up buying more than they actually need and then wasting quite a lot of it. But it's a real challenge, I do agree.
Isn't there also a need to recreate a local food infrastructure? Because I know, you know, there was the failed attempt, wasn't there, to try and reopen the abattoir in Bishop's Castle. I live in Herefordshire. We're down to one small abattoir, which is ludicrous for a county that has so much livestock that we do. So, and I think this has been talked about for a long time, but we're actually losing the ability to source food locally if we're not careful by not investing in the insufficient local infrastructure.
So that needs a particular input, doesn't it, to address that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible for to get local distribution underway at a relatively small level fairly easily, because you can get farmers and growers involved in farmers markets and so on, but actually to get it operating at a significant level, it actually needs something which is beyond the capacity of the individual.
Yeah.
And that needs some drivers at all sorts of levels, at council level, at public procurement level, and at national government level, in terms of having a strategy which is actually focused on food chains which are addressing these problems. And I have to say that what we've heard in the last week appears that the current government policy on trade deals with Australia is going in entirely the wrong direction. It seems to me it's absolute hypocrisy. And we need to, and personally, we all need to campaign against it and tell our MPs so.
And it's very interesting that when you do get a local initiative, I mean, I've lost track a little bit, but people trying to supply their food very locally, as Mark said, in Bishop's Castle, you can get one grower completely overwhelmed with a need, but actually expanding it is more difficult. And we ourselves have been involved with local initiatives, and as Mark mentioned, the local abattoir, because livestock are an important part of our economy locally and important to our landscape, and everything just closes all the time. And those are things that farmers have got involved with, and I think on every initiative it's failed, which is a bit depressing, but we're not going to give up. You want to show that last slide, okay, and then we can see for some positive actions. To do. Sorry, were there any more questions?
Can I ask whether, in a sense, there is a right amount of livestock farming, whether that right amount is the current amount, or whether it's zero, or whether it's somewhere in between?
The role of livestock, obviously there are important issues about utilising permanent pastures effectively, and ruminants obviously enable us to produce food from land which otherwise wouldn't be producing any food, and there are often very important environmental reasons for doing so. Perhaps the more difficult question is, what is the right use of grass clover lays and grazed ruminants in arable rotations? And that is because there's the potential for these lays in an arable rotation to be the sort of fertility building driver for the whole system, to enable you to reduce the use of nitrogen fertilizers and all the problems associated with them. So there's no easy answer. All I would say is that there is an important role for ruminants in our food production in the area, but the critical thing is that it's the way these livestock are fed which is really important, and we need to make a real distinction between intensively farmed grain-fed cattle and the grass-fed cattle, which actually deliver on some of these environmental objectives.
And that takes me back to the point about us all trying to understand where this food is coming from, because often you'll hear the message about the rainforests being felled because we're eating red meat. I mean, it simply isn't as simple as that. Mark knows the chain better than I do, don't you?
Yeah, we're being asked to leave, actually.
We're being asked to leave, are we?
I've got 80 seconds.
Yeah, it's the production of soya to feed the intensive beef as much as anything else from the rainforest, isn't it? And the same with palm oil and things like that we're using in mass volumes. And it's about, you know, thinking about how your food is produced and not going for that feedlot type of beef, isn't it? And choosing something that's more locally produced on pasture. I agree.
Indeed. So you also need to have mechanisms so that the consumer can actually identify what they're buying and take choices, because I do think that consumer choice is a really important part of this whole program, even if it's not the whole answer.
And even in vegetarian diets, you know, we use a lot of soya and other proteins that come from out of our country and from other overseas and are intensively produced. So it's not as simple as vegetarian or vegan is good and meat is bad. It isn't like that, is it?
No, it isn't. And it's back to this, you know, can we aim for balanced diet, balanced land use?
Yeah.
And we've got to have the joined up thinking, which Philip Dunn was saying it's really difficult to achieve. I agree it's difficult, but the youngsters said that we've got to achieve it.
We have 5 seconds. Thank you very much.
Thank you to both of you.
Thank you.